Chapter 7. It was not possible to think at first. He turned back to the cabin, moving bent over like an old man, holding his sore arm and shoulder, and he simply couldn't think. It was enough for the moment to feel the warmth of the sun, smell the sea, see the sky, blue life. He had been certain he was dead, and suddenly there was blue life all around him, and he could not make himself think of what to do. Alone. That was it. He was alone, and the frog was full of water, and he was thirsty and hungry. It all rushed in again, and he had to fight to stop the terror of it. What he wanted to do most of all was panic, to scream and panic, and then look up and see a rescue boat or chopper and know that it was over. But that didn't happen. Alone. He was alone and had to stop the thinking before panic blew up on him and he lost control. First things first, he had to pick one thing and work on it. The storm. He knew about that. The storm had taken him, taken the boat in its fist and blown it where? How far? He frowned, thinking. The storm had lasted how long? A day? No more than that. There had been that time in the darkness, the madness in the darkness, the crashing darkness. So it had been most of one day, and through the night, and he thought into the next morning. 20, perhaps 24 hours, and how fast had the sea been taking him? No way to know. His head hurt to think about it. Say 5 knots, maybe a bit more, make it 6 knots, about 7.5 miles an hour. Too complicated. Make it 8 miles an hour. The storm had pushed him south and west at 8 miles an hour for probably 24 hours. 192 miles. But that wasn't all of it. He had sailed 12 hours at almost 10 miles an hour before that in the same direction, south and west. That was another 120 miles. Say 315 miles at least, southwest of California coast, to where he sat right now, rolling heavily in a boat half full of water. And you said not to panic, a small voice told him. Why not panic? You're alone, 300 plus miles at sea in a small boat. You deserve to panic. Go ahead and panic. Wrong thinking. He shook his head, nearly screamed at the pain it caused him, and leaned against the cabin opening. There were more demanding problems than figuring out where he was or how long it took him to get there. The frog was in trouble, still in bad trouble, even though the storm was gone. She could have only 4 or 5 inches of free board left on the sides, and at least heeling or deck would go under from the weight of the water inside the boat. If that happened, she'd go down like a rock, and I'd be floating alone 350 miles from shore in a life jacket. He had to pin things down and start somewhere. First to drink. His mouth was so dry and clammy, his lips almost stuck together when he closed them. He moved gingerly down into the cabin, standing once more in the water, and picked up a plastic cup floating in the garbage near the sail. He was amazed to find that the hand pump on the sink still worked, although to be realistic, nothing should have broken it. And he pumped the cup full 4 times and drank the water from the freshwater tank under the front bunk. It tasted slightly brackish and of fiberglass, but it was sweet to him anyway and did much to cheer him. Until he thought of the water tank. He could not remember at first how large it was, and he didn't know if it was full. Owen had told him once it was 20 gallons. 22? Was that it? He'd have to check it and see how full it was because he didn't know how soon he would get more water, because he didn't know how far he was, really, from shore, and he was alone and couldn't expect any help. And if he ran out of water, he would start to drink seawater, and he'd read stories about people who drank seawater going insane and dying horrible deaths. He stopped thinking again. The panic was right there on the edge, waiting to blow everything up if he let it go. I've got to do this thing one step at a time, he said aloud. There has to be an order to this. One hand for the ship. The phase suddenly jumped into his mind. In the old sailing days of clipper ships and square triggers, when sailors had to climb up to the rigging and hang out on the wooden yard, swinging wildly many feet above the decks while they worked at getting the sails squared away. New men especially had a hard time of it and would frequently get out on the yard, look down, and freeze in terror, grabbing the yard or sails ropes, and just hang on for dear life. And to be sure, many of those old-time sailors fell to their deaths. But for others, a mate down below would yell up, "One hand for the sailor, one hand for the ship." It meant, of course, that the sailor should let go with one hand and overcome his fear to get the sails working. The words applied now. One hand for the ship. The most important thing right now wasn't his fear. It wasn't his location or even how much water and food he had. It was the frog. His whole life depended on the frog. And if she didn't take care of her, give one hand for the ship, none of the rest of it was likely to matter. She was staggeringly heavy with the water in her. That was the first thing. He had to get the water out and get her back to floating right. Next to the motor in the stern compartment, the lazarette, that was a small hand pump with 2 hoses attached to it. The idea was you put one hose into the inboard water, ran the other hose over the side, and worked the plunger handle until the water was gone. He got the pump, was surprised to find the motor still in one piece, although there was a small dent in the square 5-gallon gas can next to it, and arranged the hoses one over the side and the other down in the water inside the cabin. He worked the plunger once and about a half of a cup of water spurted out into the ocean. Another pump, another squirt. He hit it 6 or 7 times really fast, but the spurt didn't decrease, always half a cup. He sat on the cockpit seat and settled into work. Half a cup a shot meant about 8 pumps to a quart of water. 32 pumps to a gallon. He studied the water down inside the cabin. It was impossible to guess how many gallons, but it had to be at least 100. So that would be 3,200 pumps of the plunger. Pump, squirt, pump, squirt. It was going to be a long day.